I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Cute little canine means it's time for Dog of the Week, the regular feature on this show where each of us picks the week's worst movies.
That's right, Gene. And my dog this week is a fish called Piranha. And how do you like this for an example of brilliant thinking? See, the government has this secret project to create a new breed of piranha fish that can live in salt or fresh water, can reproduce 3 times as fast as before, and can be a secret military weapon in the Cold War. But the fish are accidentally released into a river, and they start attacking innocent swimmers and families on vacation with their tiny little low-budget jaws. Well, my favorite scene is when a victim is in the water, being eaten alive by millions of piranha, and Kevin McCarthy comes to the rescue. Now, how does he come to the rescue? By diving into the water, naturally, and swimming toward the piranha. That's really great thinking, right? Next, they'll probably make a rip-off of the Towering Inferno, in which one guy jumps off the building and another guy jumps off to catch him.
I went to see our next movie, The Howling, knowing it was a film about werewolves, and I suspected that it might be another one of those violent movies where only women get in the neck. Well, I was in for a pleasant surprise. I thoroughly enjoyed The Howling. I think it's one of the best horror films of the last couple of years. It's the story of a television anchorwoman attacked in a porno shop as she tries to contact a man suspected of committing a series of gruesome murders. He attacks her in a peep show booth and is shot by police. She, though, has recurring nightmares about the incident, and she recalls them in a group therapy session. Her psychiatrist has recommended that she work out her problems at his therapy resort, quite a resort, and it's there that she again encounters the murderer, the same one that apparently had been shot dead in the porno bookstore. Not dead? Maybe the guy's a werewolf. The special effects of people turning into werewolves are quite spectacular and quite gross, and I think they use them maybe once too often. But the best part of The Howling for me is the general level of tension that the film develops. I got scared. The movie drew me into its world of werewolves, and at the same time, I admired the filmmaking. This movie even made the shadows of werewolves on the wall come alive. It's aggressive, it's gross, it's entertaining. I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, you know, I agree and I disagree. I agree that it's a superior horror film, and I think that people who like horror films and like werewolves are likely to like this one more than I did. You know, we've talked on previous shows about things like eroticism, humor, and fright. You can't fake them. Either you feel them when you're watching the movie or you don't. I have to admit I was not scared by this film, and so for that reason, I don't recommend it.
But didn't you enjoy the idea of being, didn't you enjoy your time in the theater while you were watching it?
I love the guys turning into werewolves, even though it went on and on a little bit too much. I enjoy that. I like some of the backstage humor involving the television newscast.
It's a lot more witty than the average horror film. And when you call it a superior horror film, that's your phrase, right back to you. I think you're right.
I'm giving it a mixed negative review. In other words, I didn't quite like it, but somebody else might. How's that? It's right on the borderline.
Somebody else might. Me.
Somebody else was you. Okay, congratulations. You get a free ticket.
I got the right one.
Okay,
all right. Most everyone over the age of 20 remembers with relish the marvelous TV adventures into time and space called The Twilight Zone. Very clever and very scary stuff they were. And so a bunch of young film directors in Hollywood have gotten together to film the ultimate tribute. 4 25-minute episodes, sort of. The directors are Joe Dante, John Landis, Steven Spielberg, and George Miller. And the biggest surprise is that the worst episode was directed by Steven Spielberg of E.T. fame. Here's a scene from that episode with Scatman Crothers playing sort of a magical cheerleader to some old people who want to become young at heart. Well, he has a nice smile, but the scene is just too obvious for my taste. Now, the scariest episode is the last of the 4, directed by George Miller of Mad Max fame. It tells a story of an airplane passenger deathly afraid of flying. How would you like that to be your in-flight movie, The Twilight Zone? Take another flight. That was John Lithgow, and he's terrific in this little story. The reason this section works the best of the 4 is that it, more than the others, I think, convinces us that we've really entered another world, which was the whole secret of the show. I also somewhat like the story about a woman traveler visiting a weird family full of human cartoon people, and the moral parable about racism that opens the film. It's okay. So, on balance, an okay movie, just barely okay.
I would say it's just barely not okay. I didn't like either one of the first 2 segments. John Landis's thing about racism I thought was very predictable. Yeah, I agree with you. Spielberg was the disappointing low point.
Amazing.
The 2 lesser-known directors, Joe Dante, who has that part where the traveler goes into the strange people in the roadside house,
it's kind of neat.
And then George Miller of The Road Warrior with the scene that we just saw. Those were good, but on the whole, I would say I couldn't recommend the movie.
Well, we both agree it's sort of 50-50 on the 4 segments. The thing that tips it over into positive for me is the opening thing with Dan Aykroyd, the introduction to the 4 segments. Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks, they're very funny, and they come back at the end just barely enough to make a recommendation.
Wouldn't you say, with all the tradition of The Twilight Zone, they could have come up with 4 episodes, 4 strong ones instead of 2?
I wish they had.
You know, there are 3 things that everybody should really know about a gremlin. First of all, they don't like bright lights. Secondly, if they get wet, they reproduce like rabbits. And third, you should never, ever feed a gremlin after midnight. And if you stop to think about it, of course, it's always after midnight. And while they were telling me about those 3 rules at the beginning of Gremlins, I felt a real sense of delight because I knew that all 3 of those rules were inevitably going to be broken right away, and it was going to be fun to see them broken. That kind of storytelling magic is at the heart of Gremlins, which tells a simple story about a man who, in this scene, visits a mysterious shop in Chinatown to buy a Christmas present for his son. But he does buy that gremlin and takes the furry little beast home as a present. And, of course, that's about all you're going to see of Gremlins on television. Remember with E.T. how Spielberg only let you see the little finger going around the corner of the woodshed there, and with Gremlins, that's all you see. And, of course, there's another kind of gremlin, too, that has claws instead of furry little paws. That comes later in the movie. I guess it goes without saying that gremlins start out, at least, as cute little beasties. After all, this movie was produced by Steven Spielberg, the man who invented E.T., but gremlins can also be very mean, especially when they're fed after midnight. And this movie is not the same sort of heartwarming, cheerful fable that E.T. was. It has a darker sense of humor. There are some scenes in this movie where it really gets kind of gruesome, especially when that gremlin explodes inside the microwave oven. And although we accept that E.T. is a real, plausible creature, gremlins, I think, are basically just magical little story gimmicks designed to inspire a lot of action. Gremlins is a wicked and funny movie, sort of a satire on all those grade B thrillers about monsters that attack small towns, and from that point of view, I liked it. I liked the fact that they were trying to do something more than just make another cute little animal movie.
Yes, I liked it too. Maybe I have a little sick sense of humor. Maybe. I know I do.
I do too, right.
Okay, and I like that part of it. It's not a namby-pamby little film, and parents should know that. But I enjoyed it because it really is walking between 2 kinds of pictures, and I think it pulls it off. It's walking between the sweet little innocent Christmas fable, and it's also a flat-out horror film with the bad gremlins who going to devour that town that the little boy lives in. And I thought the director, Joe Dante, really did a nice job moving between those 2 kinds of stories, so I bought the whole thing.
I'll tell you what, in a way, this is a haunted movie, and what it is haunting is the whole tradition of Norman Rockwell Christmas American Hollywood movies.
Right.
The first shot in the movie practically is that town that's obviously an artificial, you know, all the little lights glimmering just like at the beginning of a Disney picture, and before long, everything that can go wrong on Christmas Eve in this sweet little town is going to go wrong, and the whole place is going to be up for grabs. And that kind of satire was really interesting in this film.
It's like a Norman Rockwell painting, well, only there's blood on the turkey, you know, that kind of thing. The plot of our next movie, named Explorers, is becoming sort of standard stuff at the movies these days. 3 kids build a makeshift spacecraft, and using an alien force field, they zoom off into outer space looking for life. Now, can you believe it? We just sort of accept that as something that kids do every day now, at least every day in the movies. Here out of the 3 kids, one's a dreamer, another's a loner, and the third is a junior scientist who has discovered how to make connections with this force field. I think they got that little gopher from Caddyshack, actually. Explorers is pretty good when it comes to setting up the kids. They're a fresh, entertaining bunch, all right. But the film really bogs down when the kids, now launched into outer space, are captured by an alien spaceship and meet creatures, and we're really rooting for something interesting for them to find that, meet creatures that are really kind of dumpy. One is sort of an outer space Marilyn Monroe or a Miss Piggy who looks like she was made out of old tires and bowling pins. Real boring. Now, there are other space creatures that they meet up there, and one is kind of cute for a while. He talks a gibberish English based on his seeing a lot of American TV. But that's a stand-up comedy bit that runs about 5-6 minutes, and it's like Johnny Carson's monologue. Once it's over, the show gets less interesting, you know? And I walked out of the theater after seeing Explorer. Well, it was not bad, but just not enough payoff when we get to outer space. That's what we're really looking for, something dazzling, and it's just not there. So for me, a mixed review on Explorers.
I vote thumbs down, Gene. I thought the problem with the movie was a real inconsistency of tone. We begin with a universe which, given the fact that these kids are going to go to outer space, is perhaps a bit fantastical, but nevertheless, they're treated like real kids. They live in a real house. They go down to the basement. They play with their computer. One is smart. One is a loner, as you described. And it's supposedly realistic. Then they get into outer space, and suddenly we're in some kind of a parody, a comedy. These creatures in outer space are not like any aliens that we are even remotely supposed to believe really could be or might be up there in outer space. They are a stand-up comedy act, and it's a real disappointment. I think that these kids are bright enough and smart enough and daring enough that when they get to outer space, they deserve to find something better than Milton Berle imitations.
Yeah, there won't be a sequel to this film, I predict.
I think you're right.
But the kids deserve one because they deserve to go to a much more interesting place. They should have been captured by somebody else. I don't know how to explain it, other than maybe this film was just simply made very quickly. In other words, in the throes of E.T. and that, they said, let's get this out.
Of course, and the director, Joe Dante, did the segment of Twilight Zone where the guy traveling along the road meets the people in the house who seem to be influenced by television, and maybe this is an extension of that idea, but it's the wrong idea to have as the payoff for this movie.
Yeah, one of the things you don't want to know in a space film is that it's less interesting up there than it is here.
Good point.
Our next film is one very ambitious comedy called Inner Space, which combines elements of The Picture of the Fly, An Experiment Gone Wrong, with another movie called Fantastic Voyage. Remember that one? It starred Raquel Welch, miniaturized, taking a trip through a person's bloodstream. Strange film. In Inner Space, however, Dennis Quaid stars as a test pilot who volunteers for a radical experiment. He's going to be reduced in size and injected into a rabbit. Unfortunately, after he winds up in the syringe, he's injected into the bloodstream of a mild-mannered grocery clerk, played by Saturday Night Live's Manic Martin Short, who can't believe someone is inside him.
All I know is I was inside a syringe, and now I'm inside you.
High-tech thieves want to steal the microchip process that has reduced Dennis Quaid, but in a quiet moment, Quaid wants to know more about the man he's inside.
Is that you?
Yeah, it's me.
Look at you.
Yeah, look at me.
They do really sort of like each other, and there's also a nice love story involving Meg Ryan as Quaid's girlfriend, who grows eventually to like the nerd who encapsulates her boyfriend. Inner Space is very ambitious. You can see all the things that are going on with a love story, the two guys, the plot of the high-tech thieves. So much is going on at times, it actually wore me out with some of its special effects and all the story twists and turns. And yet, I admired the various performances. I was amazed by some of the humor and the effects going on inside Martin Short's body. Short is really all funny by himself. He doesn't need that many special effects. So I basically liked Inner Space. I just wish it had been edited a little tighter. I wanted the story not to belabor itself.
I also felt the story ran on just a little bit too long. It could have been tightened up a lot, but boy, there is a lot in this movie. And the special effects were interesting because they used, it looked to me like, actual photography of inside real human bodies. Those scenes where he's being dragged down into the valve of the heart there, I mean, it was almost like Michael DeBakey should have been the cinematographer for that one. And the whole plot is fun because Martin Short is fun as the guy on the outside. Dennis Quaid is charming. He's got a great personality, but he sits in the capsule the whole time. Short, who really didn't realize his potential in Three Amigos, is really good this time. This is the first movie where I think he could be a movie star.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you wait when there's a big talent on a show like Saturday Night Live, you wait for the movie. Eddie Murphy got lucky, hit it right away with 48 Hours. Now Martin Short has his picture, and it's called Inner Space. It's that good.
Called The Burbs, a comedy starring Tom Hanks as a suburban homeowner whose neighbors are already quite strange, and then their block is invaded by a really unusual family, one that commits a cardinal sin of the suburbs. They let their house rot. That leads to all sorts of neighborhood gossip.
I'm telling you, these people are Satanists. As I sit here, they are Satanists. Look.
The mystery turns up a notch when Hanks's dog pokes around the strange neighbor's home.
Where the hell did Vince get this?
Eventually, a couple of the neighbors scare up enough courage to visit the strangers. And what do you bring suspected ghouls? Brownies.
Yoo-hoo, it's Carol Peterson from next door. Is your mother home?
I wasn't amused by The Burbs. Tom Hanks seems smarter on screen than to suffer through this story. We wait for him to leap ahead, and the film's parody of suburban life is hardly original. The neighbors are not frightening, nor are they funny. I can't think actually of anything I liked about The Burbs. I know it's a big hit in its first weekend because of Tom Hanks' star power. I was stunned.
Tom Hanks is a big star, and I think he's responsible for the fact that this movie is doing so well, but actually, it's kind of a very pale imitation of Neighbors, that Aykroyd and Belushi picture.
Yeah, I like that.
Which I liked a lot more. This movie is bankrupt of imagination. It goes nowhere. It uses a lot of special effects to no avail, and the sad thing is, in a way, it's because Tom Hanks is so popular that this movie is such a box office hit. And another movie that opened on the same weekend, The Mighty Quinn, which both of us thought was one of the best movies of the year, went right down in the ratings. You know, it's too bad because people see this and they don't have a very good time, or at least I think a lot of people wouldn't have a very good time, and then they get kind of down on the movies and they miss the opportunity to see one that would have really sparked them.
Well, it is. I mean, it's a stunning film to me because I just didn't find, I never laughed once.
No.
Coming up next.
It's called Gremlins 2, The New Batch, and here's a sequel that really suffers because it is so repetitive. Not with the original film so much as with itself. The Gremlins run wild here and run wild some more and then some more. All that's holding the action together is a slight parody of the entrepreneurial world of a billionaire developer modeled after Donald Trump and Ted Turner. The bad little gremlins have invaded a Manhattan office building, and Zach Galligan, as the film's young hero, tries to warn his disbelieving co-workers. Typical of the fuss the gremlins create is when they run amok in a toy store in the building's shopping mall. The lead naughty gremlin in the picture is a character called the Brain, voiced by Tony Randall, who explains on a TV show to an audience of people and gremlins that his gang wants to be civilized.
I mean, you take a look at this barrel here. Now, was that civilized? No, clearly not. Fun, but in no sense civilized.
I really enjoyed the first Gremlins movie. It was funny and also had some meanness to it that seemed to be funny as well. But this new picture is just too frantic for my taste. It starts out with a cute, good little gremlin, and then all heart and emotion in the film disappear. The Donald Trump jokes and the Ted Turner jokes start to wear thin, and once you've seen one gremlin create a mess, it isn't really a whole lot funnier to see 100 gremlins doing the same thing.
I completely agree with you, and additionally, it seems to me that the gremlins in the first movie were better made, that they were more interesting as creations. We know, of course, that they're a combination of, in some shots, they're probably like Muppets, and other shots, they're probably slightly animated and so forth. They have various ways of doing this. But in this movie, they look constantly, they just look like dolls that you could kind of, that were being pushed into shots or popped up in front of the camera or something. Yeah. In the first movie, I really had the illusion that they were genuine little creatures instead of simply props.
We hadn't seen them before, and I remember going to that movie, and you know, and the movie held back showing what they were, and there was a great sense of discovery and wonderment about them. And here, it's true, they are right up front. They're like in a toy store displayed to be purchased in some way, and it makes them a whole lot less interesting.
You know, the movie began with this little fake cartoon that starts out like it's going to be a Bugs Bunny cartoon, and then Daffy Duck comes in and they fight over who's going to get the top billing, and they finally decide that since they can't both be in the same cartoon, they might as well start the movie. I would have liked to have seen the whole cartoon.
Yeah, that annoyed me. If you're going to set up a cartoon, particularly for a picture like Gremlins 2, I think you ought to deliver the cartoon. Why frustrate us? That was all a strange way to start a picture.
Our first movie is named Matinee, and this is a delightful and surprising comedy that somehow combines the Cuban Missile Crisis with young love and the sneak preview of a science fiction movie about a man who turns into a giant ant. The movie stars John Goodman as a cheerful exploitation filmmaker who specializes in gimmicks and cheap horror films. Like Alfred Hitchcock, he appears in his own coming attraction.
I feel I should warn you. The story of Mant is based on scientific fact.
In Key West, Florida, young Simon Fenton plays a monster movie fan who talks himself inside the theater while Goodman is setting up for his big show.
Giving it to the people right where they need it the most.
Cool.
Meanwhile, Kelly Martin has a lot of fun as the school beauty who has selected her next boyfriend. And Kathy Moriarty plays Goodman's leading lady, who doubles as a phony nurse as part of the hype for the film.
It's a release form. It says it's not our fault if the movie scares you to death.
Matinee is hard to describe unless you understand that somehow all of these different pieces fit together into a movie that is sometimes very funny and always has a genuine charm. Goodman is good as the horror filmmaker because he goes easy on the sleaze and somehow communicates how much this character really loves making those awful movies. Matinee sounds unlikely, but it works wonderfully well, and I really enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed it, too. First credit director Joe Dante, who did Gremlins, and he sort of worked always at the fringes of movie making, and this is a really good job here.
Yes, it is.
When I watched this picture at the beginning, and as soon as I saw that it was going to be a parody of these kinds of films, I had to ask myself as a critic the following question. Would it be more fun to see those old films than what I was about to see? And the answer is, this is just as good, campy, fun, it's very well written. Charlie Haas did the screenplay, and it's really smart. You mentioned Hitchcock. I think actually the pattern for this guy is Arch Oboler, who did The Bubble.
Arch Oboler, and also in particular William Castle, who was the guy that actually put buzzers under the seats and so forth. And you know, as you watch this guy wiring this theater, and he's broke, and his creditors are coming down on him, and his girlfriend is going to leave him, and you realize that he's not just trying to steal money from the groups. He likes to put on a show.
Yes, and there's a praise of him as a real showman, and yes, that kind of showman is
one touch that I really liked is, and I won't give away the secret, but the kid that he hires to play the aunt who runs up and down the aisles, that's a good touch.
There's a lot of good things in this movie. Matinee is the name of it. Okay. High-tech toys are on the warpath in our next film, Small Soldiers, in which director Joe Dante expands upon the premise of his hit film Gremlins, this time offering 2 sets of children's toys that come alive and cause all sorts of havoc. One set of toys are soldiers, led by Major Chip Hazard, sort of a cross between the imperious Buzz Lightyear character in Toy Story and maybe General Patton.
Sound off, soldiers! Save it for the enemy.
His mission is to destroy the other set of toys that comes alive, a gentle but fierce-looking breed of aliens known as the Gorgonites.
We fixed him.
We tried to fix him.
One of the more intriguing Gorgonites is a sweet cyclops called Ocula. I think Ocula deserves its own movie. Based on the TV ads for Small Soldiers, I was expecting a cutting-edge film on the order of Toy Story. No way. Neither the story nor the animation here is at the same level. In terms of the look of this film, I was only impressed when the soldiers moved in group formation. But there was one other thing I did like. I got a kick out of how the soldier toys, at least Chip Hazard, punches his way out of the plastic shell covering that keeps him in his presentation box. If one of the toy companies could ever rip off that idea, I think it would be a bestseller. And yet, this movie had me wanting it to be more so often that I really can't recommend it. Were you confused too, or were you set up by the ads for a Toy Story kind of picture?
Well, I tell you, I was set up for a children's picture, and I think that younger children are going to be terrified by this movie.
Oh, I don't know.
I really think so, because younger kids think of these toys and animated figures as being real in the same sense that the real characters are. And in this movie, when you have Barbie doll lookalikes being chewed up and spit out by a lawnmower, when you have the kid and the leader of the bad guys fighting on a transformer box to see who is going to get electrocuted, when you have body parts disassembled and crawling around in the street trying to put themselves back together, that's too intense for younger children. I don't know why that level of violence and gore and gruesome detail was necessary in this family film.
But let me ask you, Roger, do you think at the point that these things occur in the film that the kids are going to even care that much about it?
I feel that some of the things in the movie are well done. The real-life actors, the integration of real life and the characters. I think it was wise that the characters move like toys rather than like fully animated little creatures, because they are supposed to be battery-powered toys. Those decisions are all okay, but I just think that there's a level of gruesomeness and gore in this movie that smaller grade school children are going to be turned off by.
Okay, I guess what we've identified is that older folks and younger children skip it. Does that leave just teenagers?
Okay, our next movie is Looney Tunes. He probably could have been in this too. This was called Looney Tunes Back in Action, featuring Brendan Fraser and Jenna Elfman, who were probably paid more than co-stars Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny. This is a cheerful and self-referential romp, blending animation with live action in a non-stop quest for silly laughs. The in-joke is that Bugs and Daffy are contract players for Warner Brothers, and they interact with studio employees who treat them like real people, or at least real wisecracking cartoon animals. I'm glad to see the real Shaggy and Scooby agree with my pan of the feature release of Scooby-Doo. Fraser plays hapless studio security guard DJ Drake, who heads to Vegas to rescue his kidnapped movie star father, who's also a spy.
After it, stunt boy.
And Steve Martin employs impeccable timing as the nerdy and evil chairman of the Acme Corporation.
Just go take a shower and don't come back till you smell better.
Looney Tunes Back in Action is not the most seamless marriage of animation and live action. Sometimes the actors seem to be kind of looking off in the distance or holding their arms out, knowing the cartoon characters will be filled in later. And there are more smiles than outright laughs, but there are a lot of smiles. Fraser's rubbery charm is perfectly suited for silly movies like George of the Jungle and Looney Tunes, and Elfman does a nice job as the sidekick. And special mention has to go to Joe Alasky, who honors the late Mel Blanc with his uncanny voice characterizations of Bugs, Daffy, Tweety, and a host of other animated favorites. Thumbs up.
Thumbs up for me, too. And you're right, it's not seamless. It's not like Roger Rabbit or some of these other films. But on the other hand, it has a nice goofy charm about
Doesn't
it. I
it?
didn't mean to mention Goofy. He comes from a different studio, but I liked the idea that Daffy and Bugs are actually, you know, annoyed about their contracts, and that Bugs makes more money than Daffy. And I always kind of wondered how that was in the Toon universe, and now I know.
Yeah, it's great. You see the dynamic between these two characters. And we go to Vegas, and you get a little Jeff Gordon, the race car driver's in there, and you get Heather Locklear. I mean, every scene, they pepper it with something to keep us amused on a couple of different levels.